I spent most of my life walking around like a man trying not to trip over his own shadow. When your whole family calls you the dumb one for 30 years, you start to believe the echo more than your own heartbeat. I remember the first time it sank in. I was maybe 10. Somebody made a joke about how my brain must be out on lunch break, and everyone laughed. Even the people who were supposed to protect me. That laugh followed me through school, through jobs, through every room where my family gathered like a jury waiting for a verdict. But here's the thing. Life has a strange way of keeping score even when folks try to erase the chalkboard. And sometimes, the truth walks right into the room wearing a face you never expected and speaks words that change everything. Stay close now, because this story climbs slow at first, but when it rises hard. I grew up learning to stay quiet, to take the blow before it landed, because every time I tried to speak up, someone in the family turned it into a joke. They said I asked slow questions, said I missed obvious things, said I would never amount to anything because my head just was not built right. After a while, you start playing the part they give you. I took simple jobs, kept simple dreams, and made myself small enough to fit inside the little box they built for me. I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe they would stop seeing me as the disappointment. But shrinking never saved me. It only made it easier for them to ignore me. Every holiday felt like walking into a spotlight I never wanted. Someone would toss out a comment about how surprised they were that I kept a job, or how lucky I was that folks were patient with me. All those little cuts, year after year. They pile up until you do not know where the bruise ends and the bone begins. But the world has a funny way of twisting. One day my nephew came to me, struggling with school, not understanding why the numbers on his page just would not make sense. I sat with him, not like a teacher, not like an expert, just like a man who knew what it felt like to be talked down to. I showed him a way to see the numbers that made sense to me, a simple little pattern that always lived inside my head. My brother walked by and rolled his eyes, said it was cute that I was trying, said the boy would fail anyway because he was learning from the wrong person. I swallowed that like I swallowed everything. Quiet, heavy, hoping it would go away. Then the door opened, and a stranger stepped in, a Harvard professor visiting my brother's family. And without knowing it, that man was about to tilt my whole life on its axis. If you are still with me, and you feel the weight of this story sitting in your chest, stick around, because the next part is where the ground finally cracks open under all of us. The professor walked in like he had wandered into the wrong house. Polite, soft-spoken, the kind of man who notices things most people step right over. He saw my nephew hunched over the table, saw me leaning in beside him, and he paused like he had just watched something important happen. I remember thinking I should move aside, make room for the real smart people, the ones who belonged in rooms like that. My family always acted like intelligence was some kind of club, and I could never afford the membership fee. The professor asked what we were working on. My brother jumped in and said it was nothing, just the dumb uncle trying to help. Said it with a laugh that expected everyone else to laugh too, like always. But the professor did not laugh. He asked me to explain what I had shown the boy. So I walked him through the pattern, slow, steady, the way it had always lived in my head. Numbers were never a struggle for me. They just never came out the way teachers expected them to. I thought that meant I was wrong. For 30 years, I thought that made me broken. The professor watched my hands, watched how I drew lines between numbers, how I grouped them, how I made them dance into place. He did not blink. Not once. He asked me to show another example. So I did. Then he asked another, and another, and for the first time in my entire life, someone was not rolling their eyes, not cutting me off, not treating me like the slow one in the room. My brother started shifting in his seat, getting restless, annoyed. He finally asked the professor why he was wasting time entertaining my little tricks. The professor just raised a hand, calm, soft, but firm enough to silence him. Then he said something I will never forget. He said, "This is not a trick. This is a form of spatial numerical reasoning I teach at Harvard. Very few people use it naturally, and when they do, they are often labeled wrong by people who do not understand what they are seeing." The room went still. I could feel every eye turn to me. But for once, the weight of their stare did not crush me. The professor asked me if anyone had ever tested me for any kind of gifted pattern cognition. I told him no. No one ever bothered. They assumed I was slow, so I assumed it too. He nodded, like the pieces were falling into place. Then he said, "You are not slow. You are the opposite. Your brain is wired for high-level pattern mapping. Most adults cannot do what you just did without training." It felt like someone opened a window in a house I had been trapped in my whole life. Fresh air rushed in, and all the lies I had swallowed for decades started leaking out of me. My sister tried to laugh it off, said the professor was just being kind, said I probably memorized the pattern, said I always did little weird things like that did not mean anything. The professor walked in like he had wandered into the wrong house. Polite, soft-spoken, the kind of man who notices things most people step right over. He saw my nephew hunched over the table, saw me leaning in beside him, and he paused like he had just watched something important happen. I remember thinking I should move aside, make room for the real smart people, the ones who belonged in rooms like that. My family always acted like intelligence was some kind of club, and I could never afford the membership fee. The professor asked what we were working on. My brother jumped in and said it was nothing, just the dumb uncle trying to help. Said it with a laugh that expected everyone else to laugh too, like always. But the professor did not laugh. He asked me to explain what I had shown the boy. So I walked him through the pattern, slow, steady, the way it had always lived in my head. Numbers were never a struggle for me. They just never came out the way teachers expected them to. I thought that meant I was wrong. For 30 years, I thought that made me broken. The professor watched my hands, watched how I drew lines between numbers, how I grouped them, how I made them dance into place. He did not blink. Not once. He asked me to show another example. So I did. Then he asked another, and another, and for the first time in my entire life, someone was not rolling their eyes, not cutting me off, not treating me like the slow one in the room. My brother started shifting in his seat, getting restless, annoyed. He finally asked the professor why he was wasting time entertaining my little tricks. The professor just raised a hand, calm, soft, but firm enough to silence him. Then he said something I will never forget. He said, "This is not a trick. This is a form of spatial numerical reasoning I teach at Harvard. Very few people use it naturally, and when they do, they are often labeled wrong by people who do not understand what they are seeing." The room went still. I could feel every eye turn to me. But for once, the weight of their stare did not crush me. The professor asked me if anyone had ever tested me for any kind of gifted pattern cognition. I told him no. No one ever bothered. They assumed I was slow, so I assumed it too. He nodded, like the pieces were falling into place. Then he said, "You are not slow. You are the opposite. Your brain is wired for high-level pattern mapping. Most adults cannot do what you just did without training." It felt like someone opened a window in a house I had been trapped in my whole life. Fresh air rushed in, and all the lies I had swallowed for decades started leaking out of me. My sister tried to laugh it off, said the professor was just being kind, said I probably memorized the pattern, said I always did little weird things like that did not mean anything. But the professor stood his ground. He said my way of thinking was rare, powerful, and completely misunderstood. He said if I had been born into a family that recognized it, I would be in a very different place in life. Hearing that felt like being handed back years of my life that had been stolen, but I also felt this deep ache, a grief for the boy I had been. The one who thought he was broken because everyone he loved told him he was. My nephew looked at me with this wide-open admiration, like he was seeing his uncle for the first time, like someone had flipped on a light. My brother muttered that it did not change anything, that I still barely scraped by in life. That genius was not real unless you had success to prove it. The professor just stared at him, calm, almost sad. Then he said, "Sometimes the greatest minds are buried under the deepest doubt, especially when that doubt is planted by family." Those words cracked something inside me, because they were true, too true. And in that moment, I felt a shift in the room. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, like the first tremor before the real quake. I remember standing there after the professor spoke, feeling like the walls had shifted an inch to the left, like the whole house was learning how to breathe again. My family stood frozen, every one of them wearing that stiff little smile people get when the truth does not match the story they have been telling for years. The story they built out of me, the story they wanted to believe. The professor asked if he could speak to me alone. My brother tried to answer for me, as he always did, but the professor gently insisted that he wanted a quiet moment with me, just me. The man they called slow, the man they thought needed his hand held through life. So we moved to the porch. A small wooden space with peeling paint and a view of a yard that never seemed to change. I felt like a kid again, awkward, waiting for the adult to tell me what mistake I made. But the professor looked at me with a softness I had not seen in years. He told me he had met people like me before, but not many, said my way of seeing patterns was something even his grad students struggled to grasp. He talked about how some minds are shaped in ways the world does not understand. And when the world does not understand, it labels, it mocks, it pushes down. I felt my throat tighten, felt old memories rushing back, teachers calling me distracted, siblings calling me slow, relatives speaking loudly around me like I could not keep up. All that weight pressing down for decades. And now, here was a stranger saying I had been carrying a gift all along, a gift I never knew how to unwrap. I told him about my childhood, how every time I solved something in my own way, someone told me it was wrong, how I learned to hide my thoughts, hide my curiosity, hide any spark that made me stand out. He listened without interrupting, without judging, just absorbing every word like it mattered. Then he said something that cut right to the bone. He said, "You learn to survive by shrinking yourself. But that does not mean the mind you hid was small. Sometimes the world fails a child long before the child fails anything." Those words hit me deeper than I expected. I could feel all the years of being dismissed weighing on me. The years of silence. The years of believing I was less than. And for the first time, I let myself wonder what my life might have looked like if someone, anyone, had taken a real moment to see me. When we stepped back inside, my family tried to act like nothing had happened. My sister asked if we were done with the little talk. My brother made a joke about me getting extra credit. Their voices too loud, too quick. The way people sound when they are scrambling to close a door that has already swung open. But the professor stayed steady. He looked at my family and explained plainly that I had a rare cognitive structure, that the way I understood patterns was unique and highly advanced. He said they had misjudged me for years, that I did not lack intelligence. I lacked support, opportunity, guidance, and belief. My mother looked confused, like she was trying to add up two numbers that refused to meet. She muttered that I never did well in school, never got the big jobs, never lived up to expectations. The professor answered gently, "Some brilliance does not fit inside the narrow doorway of standard learning. And when a child is told he is wrong enough times, he stops trying to walk through any door at all." I felt my chest tighten again, not from shame this time, but from the strange warmth of someone finally speaking truth on my behalf, a truth I did not even know how to say for myself. My brother grew irritated. He said the professor did not know me, said he was romanticizing the whole thing, said I was a fully grown man with nothing to show for my life. I felt the old familiar sting, the one I carried since childhood. But this time, it landed differently, lighter, like it could not find the same wound to dig into. The professor met his eyes and said, "You measured him with the wrong ruler, a ruler built from your own fears and pride, not from his potential. That ruler has caused damage, and the least you can do now is stop using it." My brother did not respond, not because he agreed, but because for the first time in my life, someone had spoken to him with an authority he could not shrug off. I noticed my nephew still sitting at the table, watching, his eyes wide, full of a kind of respect I had never seen directed at me from anyone in our family. He whispered, "Uncle, can you show me more?" And his voice cracked a little because he believed in me. Really believed. That small voice settled into me, warm and deep, like a seed finally falling into soil it could grow in. The professor asked if I had ever considered taking classes, not the usual kind, but ones designed for pattern thinkers. He said my mind could do remarkable things if I stopped holding it back. He even offered to connect me with a colleague who specialized in alternative cognitive mapping. I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. Excitement for what might be possible. Fear for all the years I had lost believing I was nothing. My family started drifting away, mumbling excuses, busy with anything that did not involve admitting they might have been wrong for half a lifetime. But their silence said enough. The story they built could not stand anymore, and they knew it. I stayed with the professor, kept talking, kept learning, kept feeling my mind stretch in ways I had not allowed it to stretch in years. And little by little something inside me started to rise, like a man finally waking up after a long, long sleep. By the time the professor left things in, that house were different. Not loud different, not dramatic different, but deep different. The kind of different that roots itself in the walls, in the air, in the spaces between people who no longer know where to place their pride. I walked out to my car later that night, feeling taller, not in my body, but in my spirit, like I had been carrying a broken version of myself for so long, and now the real version was finally stepping into the light. The morning after the professor left felt strange, like the air in the house had shifted overnight, like someone had opened all the windows in a place that had been sealed for decades. I woke up with this quiet hum in my chest, a feeling I did not recognize at first, and then it hit me. It was possibility. Pure and simple. Possibility after 30 years of none. I went downstairs, and for the first time in a long time, nobody looked at me with that familiar tilt of the head, the one people give when they see someone they believe is beneath them. My family avoided my eyes, not out of kindness, but out of fear. Fear that I had learned something about myself. Fear that they had been wrong about me. Fear that I might finally see the truth of what they had done. My brother sat at the table pretending to scroll through his phone, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight way he swallowed, the same way he used to look when he got caught lying as a kid. My sister moved around the kitchen too quickly, putting things away that did not need putting away. And my mother kept fussing with her sweater, like she wanted to pull it over her face. I poured myself a cup of coffee, set it down, and just sat quietly, letting the silence build, letting them feel the weight of it. For years, the silence had belonged to them. They used it to shrink me, to belittle me, to remind me of the place they thought I deserved. But now the silence belonged to me, and they did not know what to do with that. My brother finally cleared his throat, a sharp little sound, and said he hoped I did not get any big ideas from last night. He said people like the professor always tried to make ordinary folks feel special. He said not to take it too seriously. He spoke like a man trying to glue a broken story back together with trembling hands. I let him speak, let the words pile up like weak bricks, and when he finished, I just nodded. Not because I agreed, but because his fear spoke louder than any of his words ever could. Later that week, the professor emailed me. He said he had talked to his colleague, and that the man was excited to meet me. He thought I might have a form of natural mapping intelligence rarely documented. He invited me to sit in on a session. Nothing official. Just a chance to see what my mind could do when it was not trapped inside the labels my family had given me. I stared at that message for a long time. My old fear whispered that it was a mistake, that I would disappoint them, that I was not meant for rooms like that. But something new inside me, something the professor had woken up, reminded me that fear was just the echo of voices that never knew how to see me. So I went. The building felt too large at first. Clean hallways, bright lights, people carrying books and notebooks, people talking about research and projects. I felt out of place, like a man walking into a world built for others. But then the professor saw me, smiled, and for the first time in my life, someone invited me into a space not because they pitied me, but because they were curious about me, about the way my mind worked, about the quiet patterns I had carried all my life. His colleague, a calm man with soft eyes, asked me to look at a few puzzles. Simple shapes, lines, grids. He asked how I saw them, how I connected them. I explained the same way I explained to my nephew. Not fancy, not technical, just the way my brain naturally moved through space. He kept nodding, scribbling notes, watching with this look of amazement, like he had found something rare. Then he placed a more complex pattern in front of me, a swirling mess of shapes that looked like a storm trapped on paper. I stared at it, let my eyes trace the hidden lines, and then, like always, the shapes fell into place. A doorway opened, a path formed, and the whole thing made perfect sense. I drew my answer, simple, clean, the way it appeared in my mind. When I looked up, both men were silent, not confused, not doubtful, but stunned. The colleague finally spoke, his voice soft with disbelief, and he said something I had never heard aimed at me in my entire life. He said, "This is extraordinary. Your mind builds connections most people cannot even see." I felt warmth spread through me. Not pride, not arrogance, but relief, deep, aching relief, like someone finally lifted a weight I had been carrying since childhood. They asked if I wanted to try another, and I did, and with each one, I felt myself opening, growing, stepping into a version of myself I never knew I was allowed to be. When I left that day, the sun felt brighter, the ground felt steadier, and I realized something important. I had spent my whole life assuming my family was right about me. Because when you are young, you believe the people who raise you, even when they are wrong, even when they are blinded by their own pride, even when their words cut deeper than they will ever admit. But now I had proof, not from a stranger on the street, not from a kind friend trying to lift my spirits, but from experts, from people who studied the mind, people who recognized something in me my family never bothered to see. Driving home, I felt something shift again. Not anger, not revenge, just truth. And truth is heavier than any insult ever thrown at me. My phone buzzed. A message from my nephew. He asked if I could help him with his homework again. Said he liked the way I explained things. Said it made school feel less scary. His words hit me harder than anything the professor said. Because he saw me, the real me, the way I had always wished someone would. When I pulled into my driveway, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I was walking toward my family, not as the dumb one, not as the disappointment, but as a man who finally understood his own worth. I walked into my family home that evening with a different kind of quiet around me. Not the old silence, the one they pushed on me, the one that made me feel small. This was a new silence, a steady silence, a silence that came from knowing my own worth without needing a single person in that house to confirm it. My brother was in the living room pretending to read the newspaper he barely understood. My sister was on her phone, scrolling fast, too fast, and my mother sat in her old armchair with her arms folded, like she already sensed something had shifted in the house, like she knew a truth had woken up that she could not put back to sleep. I set my keys down, and the sound echoed a little louder than usual. My brother grunted, asked how my little field trip went, tried to make his voice sound casual. But he could not hide the sharpness under it, the fear, the pride, the years of believing he stood above me unraveling thread by thread. I told them I had spent the day with the professor and his colleague. I told them I had taken part in a few exercises. I kept my tone simple, steady, and then, with no anger, no drama, no need to prove anything, I told them the truth. I told them the men said I had a rare mapping mind, that the patterns I used naturally were advanced, that my brain was built in a way most people never experience. The room went still. My sister laughed first, a short, nervous laugh, a laugh she used when she did not know where to put her pride. She said that was nice, that lots of people had little talents, that it did not mean anything. Then I saw it, the flicker in her eyes, that small moment when she realized her old story about me no longer held any power. It was slipping fast, and she could not stop it. My brother set the newspaper down, slow, heavy. He stared at me like a man facing a truth he spent his whole life avoiding. He said it did not matter, said a real genius would have been successful by now, said I still worked simple jobs, still lived a simple life, still had nothing to show for whatever they claimed my mind could do. But his voice shook, just a little, and in that small tremble, I heard everything. I heard the jealousy, I heard the fear, I heard the panic of a man who had built his identity on standing above me, and now he had nothing to stand on. I could have argued, I could have shouted, I could have reminded him of the years he mocked me, dismissed me, belittled me, ignored me, but something inside me had changed. I had no desire to fight, no desire to prove, no desire to make them see. The truth was enough, and the truth was mine now. Fully, completely, finally, I told them I had been invited back for more sessions, that the professors wanted to study my patterns, that they believed I could help develop new teaching methods, new ways of mapping information, ways that might help kids who thought differently, kids like I once was. My mother spoke then, her voice soft, almost trembling. She asked how long I had known. I told her I learned the same moment they did, that I went 30 years believing I was broken, because that was the story they gave me. I told her I carried their voices longer than my own, and that was the part I would always have to forgive myself for. Her eyes lowered. Her hands tightened around the fabric of her sweater, and for the first time in my life, I heard her whisper that she did not know, did not realize, did not understand what they had done. And maybe she meant it. Maybe she did not. But it was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from her, and I let it land gently, without judgment, without bitterness, because I had no room left for bitterness now. My nephew came into the room then, book in hand, and he sat next to me without hesitation, asked if I could help him again. He did not care about family pride. He did not care about old labels. He saw me the way a child sees truth, simple and clear, and when he opened his book, I felt something inside me settle, something old, something wounded, something that finally found a place to heal. I worked with him for an hour, his small voice full of curiosity, his eyes bright whenever the patterns clicked. My brother watched from across the room, silently, and for the first time in years, he looked unsure, like he was seeing a new version of me, a version he could not bully back into the shadows. Later that night, when I drove home, I felt lighter, not because my family had changed, not because they understood, but because I no longer needed them to. I realized something important, something I wish I learned decades ago. Your worth is not measured by the people who fail to see it. Your brilliance is not dimmed by the ones who fear it. Your story does not belong to the voices that tried to rewrite it. It belongs to you, fully, completely, in every quiet way that matters. The professors kept meeting with me, week after week, and my world grew wider, my confidence stronger, my mind clearer. I found work helping kids who struggled the same way I once did. Kids who needed someone who understood how it felt to be mislabeled, misread, misunderstood. For the first time in my life, I was not surviving. I was living. I was choosing. I was building something new from the pieces of the man I used to be. My family never fully admitted what they did, not in words, but in their silence, their softened tone, their sudden respect. I knew they saw it. The change, the truth, the rise. And I learned something else. You do not need revenge when the truth does the work for you. You do not need to shout when your life speaks louder. You do not need to win against them when you finally win with yourself. So if you are listening right now, and any part of my story feels familiar, take this with you. Take the quiet truth that you are worth more than the labels you were given. Take the possibility of a life built on your real self, not the small version others forced on you. Take the courage to step out of the shadow they placed you in, and let yourself grow as tall as you were always meant to. And if this story helped you, even a little, stick around. Come hear the next one, because I make these stories for folks who feel unseen, folks who need someone to say, "You are not broken, you were never broken. You were just waiting for the right moment to become yourself."